To those of wanted fugitives from around the world, the prince matched a man who had been on the run for 6 years.
We had a hit. David Davis came back, identified in Canada as being their most wanted man, called Albert Johnson Walker. So this was the first time that we actually know who this guy was.
Albert J. Walker from Ontario, Canada, had been married for 22 years and had 4 children. He became one of the 10 most wanted criminals in the world after embezzling over $4 million from investors in Canada.
He was on the verge of being caught, so he decided to flee Canada, and he took his 15-year-old daughter, Sheena, with him and disappeared completely. Or almost.
Walker and his daughter Sheena lived together in England as David and Noelle Davis, man and wife.
The Canadian police were ecstatic. We found Walker. We found Walker. Absolute excitement. One of the Canadian police decided to phone Walker's wife, Barbara. And it was very simple, very straightforward. We found Albert and we found your daughter Sheena. And by the way, congratulations, your grandmother.
When Walker fled to England, he began working the same investment scams as he did in Canada and hired Elaine Boyes as an executive assistant. Her boyfriend was Ronald Platt. When Walker no longer needed Elaine Boyes' services, he paid for Elaine and her boyfriend, Ronald Platt, to move to Canada to start a new life together. With Platt gone, Walker assumed his identity. But 3 years later, Elaine Boyes and Ronald Platt returned to England, which threatened Walker's plans.
There now were 2 Ronald Platts, and that was one too many for Albert Walker. He had to get rid of his friend.
Albert Walker put his plan into motion when he purchased a new 10-pound anchor, not for his sailboat, but for Ronald Platt. On July 20th, 1996, Walker invited Platt out on the Lady Jane for a day of sailing. With a blunt instrument, Walker knocked Platt unconscious with a blow to the back of his head. Blood and hair spattered onto the plastic bag. Then pulled Platt to the upper deck, where he slid the anchor under Platt's belt and heaved him overboard. Among the mistakes Walker made that day was failing to remove Platt's wristwatch with the serial number and using his boat's global positioning system, which captured the location, date, and time of the murder. Albert Walker went on trial for murder. In a rare courtroom occurrence, Walker's daughter testified against her own father.
At a stage in the trial, it came out in the courtroom that obviously Mr. Walker and Sheena were father and daughter, and yet 2 children were found on the premises when the police made their raid. Well, the jury was just struck dumb.
The portrait she painted of her father was an unsavory one, which did not help the jury's assessment of Walker's character. On July 6, 1998, it took the jury just 2 hours to find Albert Walker guilty of first-degree murder. He was sentenced to life in prison.
He made one big mistake, and that was that he forgot to take off that Rolex watch. And it was really that Rolex watch that led us to the identity of Ronald Platt and started the whole chain of events, which ended up with Walker getting a life sentence for murder. If he's ever released before he dies, he'll just be arrested and taken back to Canada for those offences.
Albert Walker still faces 32 counts of fraud in his native Canada, but officials doubt he will ever get out of prison in England to face those charges. Sheena Walker is now living quietly with her children in Canada. She would not agree to a paternity test on her 2 little girls.
Ronald Platt, the victim, is often forgotten. It was Ronald Platt, the 1 in a million shot of him actually returning from his watery grave 6 miles out at sea when he was caught in those nets. The injuries on his body showing us exactly how he was killed and how the anchor was used to weigh him down. The piece of paper he wrote out for his reference, where he put David Davis, the name of his killer, and his cell phone number, which led us to Davis. It was really Ronald Platt who solved this case, and when he emerged from his watery grave, pointed his tattooed hand directly at his murderer, Albert Johnson Walker.